Herbert Hoover is, to me, an example of the famous saying, you can die a hero or live long enough to be the villain. Herbert Hoover, outside his presidency, humanitarian, extremely knowledgeable engineer. If he had died before the Great Depression, or like you say, he never became president. He just, and the Great Depression happened without him being president. Historians still wouldn't have liked him because he was Republican. Historians, or Democrats generally, don't like Republicans, but they would have viewed Hoover as like in the same vein as Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt, is probably one of only 2 or 3 Republicans historians like, the other being Abraham Lincoln, and then Eisenhower. But Herbert Hoover, you study his life, it's definitely that example of, president, and all of a sudden he's the villain because of the Great Depression starting during his presidency. And also the other issue, unfortunately, is historians worship Franklin Roosevelt. And so they turn into this morality play of the evil Herbert Hoover and the pure and holy Franklin Roosevelt. And so Roosevelt's cast as the savior, and Hoover is all of a sudden the devil, the evil villain. And so that's the other issue, that myth-making and romanticizing history kind of creates this image of Herbert Hoover, that's different than reality. And so, anyway, so let's talk a little about Herbert Hoover, about him personally. And I think what's interesting, when you really study Herbert Hoover, you'll come away appreciating him more. Whether he was a good president or not, or whatever, that's fine. That's debatable. But the vilification he gets, I think, is mostly, in some ways, unfair because he's not recognized for the good he did. Historians want to use him to vilify him so that they can worship their icon, Franklin Roosevelt. Herbert Hoover was born in 1874 in West Branch, Iowa. Will that be on a quiz? I hope not. Herbert Hoover was born in Iowa. His family were Quakers, which is interesting. A Quaker family. So we have a president who's a Quaker. The Quaker religion, or Quaker faith, values self-discipline, personal responsibility, and community service. And you see that in the life of Herbert Hoover. Before he was president and after he was president. Herbert Hoover lived for decades after. He died in like the 60s. He lived for decades after he was president. He wrote. He was an elder statesman. And to me it's unfortunate he got vilified so much. The good he's done gets ignored. He was orphaned at 9, so he lived with relatives in Oregon, so Iowa, and then growing up in Oregon. He attended Stanford, and like I mentioned, his career was in mining. He worked as a mining engineer. He rose to international prominence by working in China. The Chinese organization or company he worked for is the Chinese Engineering and Mining Company. He was known for his technical expertise, the efficient management of a large multinational workforce, and strong negotiation skills. By his mid-30s, he was a wealthy, respected figure in the global mining industry. He was known for rational planning, modern engineering, and he viewed private enterprise as the engine of economic growth. His worldview was shaped by practical experience. He believed in efficient administration, expert knowledge, and voluntary cooperation rather than state control or political agitation. Hoover's so by the time World War One happens, Herbert Hoover's a well-known international figure. He's a businessman. He's a miner. He's an engineer. And so he in World War One, that's kind of how he gets into World War One relief efforts. When World War One broke out, Hoover was actually living in London. During the war, he organized a massive volunteer effort to assist stranded American tourists. His most famous humanitarian role occurred in 1914 for the Commission for Relief in Belgium, the CRB. The CRB arranged food shipments to millions of civilians in German-occupied Belgium and northern France. This operation was privately funded, diplomatically delicate. It required negotiations with not only the Allies but the Germans, so both sides fighting the war. It became one of the largest relief efforts in history up to that time. His leadership made him an international symbol of neutral humanitarianism, administrative competence, and moral seriousness. Democrat Wilson, Hoover is a Republican, registered Republican. Wilson, the Democrat president, will actually appoint Republican Hoover to lead the U.S. Food Administration during World War I. That's where you get the voluntary conservation, meatless Mondays, wheatless Wednesdays, efficient agricultural production, and the Wilson administration avoided coercive rationing. His philosophy emphasized voluntary civic duty, not government compulsion. He believed Americans would act responsibly if given clear information and moral encouragement. After the armistice, Hoover directed the American Relief Administration, providing food to millions across war-torn Europe. Famine-stricken Russia, all of Eastern Europe. His work was grounded in humanitarian obligation, stability through economic recovery. When people aren't stable, what do they turn to? They turn to radical government, right? State agitation. And the belief that relief should enable self-sufficiency, not dependency. By 1920, he was actually one of the most famous Americans in the world, international mining engineer, and now humanitarian. President Harding appointed Hoover as Secretary of Commerce, and when Coolidge became president, Hoover stayed as Secretary of Commerce. So he stayed there Commerce from 1921 to 1928. Hoover's approach to commerce was associationalism, which is voluntary cooperation among businesses, experts, and government. Standardization, promoting uniform industrial standards to reduce waste. Data collection, improving economic statistics to guide private decision making. And Hoover believed in infrastructure development, supporting aviation, new industry, radio regulation, new industry, and waterways. He did not advocate centralized economic planning. Instead, he believed that private enterprise, when properly organized and informed, could achieve national efficiency without heavy-handed government control. And that philosophy, when you get into the Great Depression, which I'm not going to go over in this video, I'll go over in class, but that philosophy goes into when the Great Depression starts. His key achievements as Secretary of Commerce: he promoted the Bureau of Standards to unify industrial measurements. He encouraged the growth of commercial aviation radio. He supported the Mississippi River flood control, especially after the Mississippi River Valley was devastated by floods in 1927. He advocated for rational land and water management in the American West, and he organized conferences to reduce industrial conflict and stabilize markets. This public image of him as a great engineer, a humanitarian, an administrator, a champion of efficiency and voluntary cooperation, a symbol of American technical and organizational prowess. This is an example of believing your own press. He decides to run for president. He's a well-known, popular figure. He wins the election in 1928 in a massive landslide. And so I encourage study of Hoover beyond the progressive oversimplification of evil Herbert Hoover and pure and holy Franklin Roosevelt. When you study Hoover outside of the biased progressive narrative, you get a Herbert Hoover that is a humanitarian, a engineer, a global international businessman, well-known, well-liked, popular. It's a very different picture than the narrative given you, because the golden narrative is you're supposed to love Franklin Roosevelt and not like Herbert Hoover. And I argue to you that's not correct. It's not accurate. So I encourage study of Herbert Hoover outside the popular narrative. I think you'll learn a lot more, and you'll have a much greater knowledge and understanding of Herbert Hoover.